Donald Trump delivered his final terms to Iran on May 3rd. Zero enrichment, permanent, verifiable, no exceptions. And this was not just a negotiating position, but the distilled core objective of the entire war, a position the United States has maintained consistently since the conflict began. These four conditions were designed to eliminate Iran's nuclear leverage entirely, closing off not just immediate capabilities, but any future pathway to enrichment. However, instead of responding directly to this demand, Iran chose a different route. It sent back a 14-point framework through Pakistan that deliberately set aside the nuclear issue and focused exclusively on ending the war. In practical terms, this created a structural disconnect. America asked a specific binary question: will you give up enrichment permanently? Iran responded with a broader, process-oriented answer: here is a framework to end hostilities. Two entirely different conversations were now unfolding within the same negotiation channel, and that divergence marks the beginning of a new phase in the conflict. This shift is not just procedural, it is strategic, and more importantly, it is systemic. Because at the center of this divergence lies China, the actor for whom this phase change carries the greatest long-term consequences. If Iran had accepted America's terms, the outcome would have been clear. Iran's nuclear leverage would disappear, and with it, the strategic justification for China's entire support architecture. That architecture includes the so-called dark fleet of tankers operating outside conventional tracking systems, a yuan-based payment network designed to bypass dollar-dominated financial channels, and large-scale strategic reserves that stabilize supply shocks. All of these mechanisms were built around one assumption: that Iran's confrontation with the United States would persist long enough to justify alternative systems. Acceptance of zero enrichment would collapse that assumption overnight. But Iran did not accept. Instead, it signaled something far more deliberate: a structured approach often described as a dual tempo strategy. On one track, Iran keeps diplomacy alive, engaging mediators, proposing ceasefires, and offering frameworks that appeal to war fatigue. On the second track, it defers the core issue, the nuclear question, preserving it as leverage for a later stage when conditions may be more favorable. This is not indecision or avoidance, it is sequencing. Iran is effectively saying that the war can end without resolving the issue that caused it, and that the most contentious element can be negotiated later under different power dynamics. Such a strategy only works under one critical condition: economic survival. A country under severe economic collapse cannot afford to delay core negotiations. It is forced into immediate concessions. Yet Iran has avoided that outcome, largely due to China's parallel system. Even after more than 60 days of sustained conflict, Iran has managed to export over 1.8 million barrels of oil per day. These exports do not flow through traditional Western-monitored channels, but through alternative routes facilitated by China: covert shipping networks, non-dollar transactions, and indirect trade pathways. This system effectively neutralizes the intended impact of American economic pressure, allowing Iran to maintain internal stability while resisting external demands. Time, in this context, becomes the most valuable strategic asset. By maintaining economic continuity, Iran buys time, and time shifts leverage. The longer negotiations stretch without resolution, the more opportunities emerge for structural adjustments, diplomatic recalibrations, and shifting alliances. Iran's 14-point framework is therefore not just a peace proposal. It is a delay mechanism, one that ends immediate hostilities while preserving long-term bargaining power. From this point forward, the situation begins to branch into three possible trajectories, each with distinct implications for China. The first is escalation. If the United States concludes that diplomacy has reached a dead end, it may resort to a final military push aimed at forcing compliance. Such an escalation would likely target critical infrastructure, ports, refineries, and logistical hubs, many of which are directly tied to China's parallel oil transport system. In this scenario, China faces a difficult real-time decision: whether to openly defend Iranian infrastructure and risk direct confrontation, or to absorb the disruption and adapt its supply chains elsewhere. Either choice carries costs, and both require rapid adjustment in a compressed time frame. The second trajectory is prolonged stalemate. Here, neither side escalates significantly, and the conflict settles into a managed equilibrium. Ceasefires are extended, negotiations continue without resolution, and the status quo persists. This is the scenario most favorable to China in the short term. Its systems continue to operate, its economic ties deepen, and its strategic position remains intact. However, this stability is not without risk. Within the United States, prolonged conflict without visible progress can generate domestic political pressure, particularly if energy prices remain elevated. That pressure can eventually force a policy shift, either toward escalation or toward compromise, both of which would alter China's calculations. The third and most consequential trajectory is a partial deal. In this scenario, Both sides step back from maximalist positions and agree to end the war while deferring the nuclear issue to a later stage. This type of agreement allows each side to claim victory domestically while postponing the most difficult questions. However, it also opens the door for new actors to shape the post-war structure, particularly Russia, which could step in as a nuclear custodian or mediator. Such a development would shift the balance of influence. As official trade channels reopen and sanctions ease, Iran's reliance on China's dark fleet and alternative payment systems would decline. China would not disappear from the equation, but its relative advantage, built during the confrontation phase, would diminish in the resolution phase. This is why Iran's current strategy is so significant. By refusing to engage directly with the nuclear question, it delays the transition from confrontation to resolution. But this delay also compresses the timeline. Decisions that might have unfolded over months are now being forced into weeks. And China, which traditionally operates in slow, incremental strategic environments, is now facing a situation that demands rapid response. The signals to watch are therefore critical. If Donald Trump sets a firm deadline for Iran's response, it indicates rising pressure and a possible move toward escalation. If Russia begins integrating its nuclear proposals into Iran's framework, it signals entry into the resolution phase. And if China breaks its public silence, issuing statements or taking visible diplomatic positions, it suggests that the outcome is moving in a direction where passive observation is no longer sufficient. So far, China's silence has been strategic. As long as the system functions and the stalemate holds, there is no need to intervene openly. But silence has limits. Once the structure of the final outcome begins to take shape, not participating becomes a liability rather than an advantage. Historically, Iran's approach is not unique. States under military pressure have often separated immediate conflict resolution from long-term political objectives. From Korean War to Vietnam War, similar patterns have emerged. Wars end before core disputes are resolved, and those disputes are negotiated later under different conditions. If that pattern holds here, the result will not simply be a bilateral agreement between Iran and the United States. It will be a broader structural shift in the global system. And at the center of that shift will be China's choice. Whether to remain the architect of a parallel system built for confrontation, or to evolve into a central player in the system that defines the resolution.